And is there a way that I make it show up there? Thank you. Mr. Chair, Representative Berger, Representative Bailey, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Sarah Gelser, State Representative from House District 16. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about HJR 7, which is another look at this property tax conundrum in which we find ourselves. I ran for the legislature primarily because I was interested in how we could create better stability for our public schools. So as I have looked at the property tax question, I have tended to apply the lens of school districts and adequate school funding. I wanted to, before I started this presentation, really wanted to thank those that have worked on the measures that we just heard about for the extraordinary job that they have done of bringing a conversation of compression to the state of Oregon. I think it is really exciting that so many people know what compression is and are interested in reading articles about it in the newspaper and talking with their local elected and state elected officials about that. That would not have happened without the excellent work of the League of Oregon Cities and Chris Fick in particular, who has really taken a complicated issue and made it accessible for people all across the state. So HJR 7 is a different take, as I said, on the property tax issue. HJR 7 does two basic things, and I will explain them in more detail in a moment. The first is that it would restore the $7.50 cap for education-related property taxes. As we heard in the presentation last week, when Measure 5 passed, the cap for education slowly ratcheted down. Before the last ratchet was applied, we were at $7.50. That would release all compressed revenues to school districts, ESDs, and community colleges. Not just the compressed revenue that is in local option levies, but also the compressed revenue that is in the base rate for school districts. And I'm going to show you in a little bit why that's so important. The second thing that HJR 7 would do is to allow school districts the opportunity in a brief 4-year period of time to be able to go out and ask their voters if they would like to increase their permanent rate. And those dollars, if House Bill 2424 passes, would be able to stay within that school district. Now, the reason that it is a 4-year window is, first of all, to protect taxpayers. If we've already raised the cap, we don't want taxpayers to be afraid that school districts are going to come back year after year to continue to ask for new increases in a permanent rate. This also will encourage school districts to be relatively modest in what they ask for in that permanent rate increase. On the other hand, it also will provide a little sense of urgency to school boards in deciding whether or not to go and ask this question of their voters. I've sat on a school board, and the decision about whether or not to go out for a bond, whether or not to go out to a levy, and whether or not the voters are ready for it in that year is a very difficult one. This puts some urgency there that helps districts say, yes, this is the time, because there ain't no other time coming later. It also allows the local voters, when they are looking at it, to recognize this is a use it or lose it opportunity for that community to take control of the destiny of its own school district and decide how they want to spend local dollars on their local kids and their local schools without interference from the legislature or the state. These would be dollars outside of the state school fund. Oops. Oh dear. I have been retrained on the Mac. So I want to talk with you a little bit about how we have talked to voters in our district about local option taxes. Corvallis School District was one of the first school districts in the state to pass a local option levy after the legislature allowed them to do so. They passed that levy in 1999. It expired in 2004, and even Corvallis was not able to renew their levy. We lost. In 2006, we went back out for a local option levy, and we essentially ran that levy campaign out of my kitchen. So we spent a lot of time talking about this issue. What was frustrating for voters was that problem of not being able to know how much they would pay, because rather than being a rate on your market value or your assessed value, you're being taxed on the gap between your assessed value and your market value. So if you look here, this is a real Corvallis property, and you can see the trend line for this property from 2009 to 2012 when our local option levy was in place. If you look at this green area at the top, that is the area where the local option levy comes out of. And And what we explained to voters when they talked about this, that question of how is it fair that some voters vote for the levy and pay nothing, and other voters vote for the levy and they will pay something. And what we explained to our voters was it really was a fairness measure. If you look at the blue, that green area, that is an area of discount. Those property tax owners are paying less than their neighbors on their property tax bills for like valued property. When you go out for a local option levy, you are recapturing that discount, and then it's capped at that market rate. So as the market value declined over the course of these 4 different tax years here, you can see that the size of that discount for those taxpayers on their base rate declined, which meant that the amount that they paid for their local option levy declined. For this property in that upper left corner, you can see that in 2009 they were paying roughly $350 a year towards the local option levy. The same property this past fall, on that tax document, they're being assessed about $25. What's important is to look down at the bottom. It's not that taxpayer is paying less in property taxes. Their property taxes haven't gone down. What's happened is we've shifted where their property tax dollars are going. Instead of going into the levy, it's going into the base rate. So at the bottom, you can see those blue bars. In the same period of time that the levy obligation decreased, that individual property tax owner's property tax increased. The rate that they paid for education services remained roughly the same. So a local option levy essentially removes the discount that is enjoyed by properties. With a cap, with the Measure 5 cap, when you pass a local option levy in a community, it is actually that equalizer between properties so that properties are paying a similar rate, unlike valued properties. Now, school districts like cities and counties, and we heard this before, are experiencing compression even if they don't have local option levies. And I put up a little array here. If you look at Corvallis School District, they are losing $3.9 million in 12-13 to compression in their levy. They're losing another small amount in their base rate. If you look at Albany and Bend, neither of those school districts have local option levies, but they are still losing value in their base rate. Now, what's important here, and where school districts are different than other taxing jurisdictions, is that if this was the city of Bend, that would be $2.2 million less that the city of Bend had to spend in that tax year. But school districts don't keep their local revenue local. We equalize everything through the state school fund. So that $2.2 million loss in Bend is actually shared by all of the school districts across the state. So that base rate compression is shared by every district in the state. And this year, in the 12-13 tax year, means a loss of about $35 million out of the state school fund. So this is impacting every single student, every single school district in the state. If you want to look at how compression impacts different taxing jurisdictions, I wanted to put a little scattergram here. And again, those same two comparisons, a district that has a levy that is losing money to compression and a district that doesn't have a levy that is losing money to compression. And you can see that the Corvallis School District is close to $4 million. The city of Corvallis doesn't even show up on there. They're losing about $100 a year to compression. Benton County has a little bit of a blip. Lynn Benton Lincoln ESD, Lynn Benton Community College. The community colleges and the ESDs, they don't go out for local option levies, but they are losing revenue in that base rate. And because they don't equalize, that is money that is actually lost to those institutions. Again, if you look at the impact of compression in Bend, you can see that impact on the Bend School District is over $2 million, but the impact to the city of Bend and the county don't register on the graph in terms of the scale. But the impact on the ESD and Central Oregon Community College, you can see the losses that they are having because of the problems in the base rate. So if HJR 7 were to pass, you can see where that compression revenue would be released if everybody that has levies today had levies today. And as we talked about earlier, there's no way to anticipate who may or may not have a levy in the future. So the best way for us to look at it is, what have we been able to do today? What kind of levies do we have in place today before this compression problem has grown? And you'll see that if HJR 7 were to pass, based on 12-13 numbers, and this will grow substantially by the time we get to 2014, about $97.2 million would be released into to school districts. $61.5 million of that would be in local option levies, but another $36 million on top of that would go directly into the state school fund, impacting all school districts. $2.5 million a year to ESDs and $3.8 million to community colleges. And again, these are annual numbers, not biennial numbers. If we went and instead just released the money from compression, if we released levy compression for everyone, you can kind of see this scattergram of, or this bar graph of where that money would go. $61.4 million to school districts, $26.7 million to counties, $10.8 million to cities, about $800,000 to special districts. And because ESDs and community colleges don't have levies, there would be no relief for those institutions. This is just a little pie chart of the distribution of the HJR 7 proceeds. You can see that 59% of that would go to school districts with levies, but 34% would go to all districts. So that includes both those districts with levies and all of the other school districts in the state. In addition, you get 2% to ESDs and 4% to community colleges. There was a question earlier about where the different levies are in cities across the state in terms of that levy compression. And again, this is looking at base compression versus levy compression. If you look at levy compression in the 12-13 data, cities are losing about $10.8 million. If we were to release that this year, if we were to have that relief, about $8.9 million of that would go to the city of Portland and about $900,000 each to Albany and Sweet Home. But you can see that the actual impact on compression on all of those other cities that are in compression is relatively small. The cities that are highlighted in red, Albany, Portland, and Sweet Home, are the only cities that have an annual compression loss of $100,000 or more. Those that are in green, you can see, have a compression loss each year of less than $100 in levies. Oops, why does this? So, and in counties, we look at the same thing. The impact on individual counties is a little bit greater. You can see the total release of levy compression would be $26.7 million, about $20.9 million to Multnomah, $4.86 million to Lynn. We've heard about the specific problems that are there in Lynn, and then the rest kind of break up in that remainder. And you can see that annual rate of compression for each of those counties for the 12-13 year, and that's from the preliminary numbers from the Legislative Revenue Office for the 12-13 year. And then looking for school districts, if the proceeds of school levy only compression release, about 46% of that would go to Portland Public Schools, about 17% to Eugene, 9% to Tiger to Walton School District, 11% to West Lynn. You can see there are 18 school districts currently that have local option levies. But the benefit of that levy release, if we release only levy dollars, is really concentrated in about 7 school districts, but will benefit 18 districts overall that currently have local option levies. And again, this is today. Who knows if we move forward if others would add additional local option levies. And today, only 21% of Oregon students attend school in a district that has a local option levy. So one of the questions that I had received about HJR 7 was whether or not it might be too much money to release, if that would be too great of a tax burden. So I wanted to do a little comparison of how much revenue we are talking about compared to HJR 7, which is base and levy compression release for all education entities, compared to levy only compression for every entity that has a local option levy. As you can see, it's roughly the same amount of revenue that would be released in compression. In HJR 7, it would be distributed more evenly across the state because you would be picking up that base compression in cities, counties, school districts, and special districts that have a loss in that base rate. The other difference that you'll see between the two, the major weakness of HJR 7 is that it doesn't really provide any compression relief for cities and counties. And as you've heard, particularly in Lynn County, as you're looking at Lebanon, as you're looking at Sweet Home, there are significant problems there that need to be addressed. On the other hand, if we just go for levy compression, you'll see that ESDs and community colleges are missing from that list. But as a policy choice or a political choice in terms of how much money is released, it's roughly the same amount of money, one focused on schools, one dividing up more among cities and counties. But again, the levy compression only is more focused in a smaller number of cities, counties, and school districts, and HJR 7 is more statewide. It puts revenue into every school district, ESD, and community college in the state. So in summary, HJR 7 benefits all public schools and all students by increasing the size of the state school fund through the release of base compression. HJR 7 additionally benefits districts with local option levies because it releases levy revenue from compression in addition. It's the only property tax proposal that provides relief for community colleges and ESDs. HJR 7 also provides communities with the opportunity to vote for more stability for their schools. It allows voters to decide whether to increase the permanent rate for their local schools, with all proceeds staying within the local district. At the same time, it's flexible. A school district doesn't have to do that. They can choose between moving forward with a temporary local option levy, increasing their permanent rate, or doing nothing at all. The other thing is that HJR 7 provides immediate relief. Upon voter approval, we've now lifted this cap, and that compression relief will occur immediately and won't require an additional election. That is not only a political hurdle, it's a time hurdle. And if we think about the immediate challenges that these jurisdictions are facing, I think we want to be looking for solutions that are able to get money more quickly into our communities. When I talked with my local school board about this, the challenge as we look at our property tax system is we want things to be fair, we want them to be adequate, we want them to be stable, we want them to be simple, and we want voters to vote for them. It's very difficult to come up with a mix that does all of those things and that is easy to explain. What I would see as a weakness in HJR 7 is the piece of it that talks about releasing compression in a levy for school districts. Those who are compressed in a local option levy are paying the same as others. If we release that local option levy, those that are paying more will still pay more. The place where I think we really start to make our property tax system safer or more equitable is the reset at time of sale provision, that proposal. That is what takes us back to a place where we are tying the market value of homes to their property tax bill. What you give up in that is some stability. You can't necessarily guess what you're going to get. As taxing jurisdictions, we also benefit from that stability when housing prices decline. We don't have to suffer those losses. If we are to move forward with the reset at time of sale, we need to find a way to allow local school districts to be able to raise local funds. Again, school districts are different than other taxing jurisdictions in that their revenue is equalized. So in a city or a county, if you reset at time of sale this green, that money all the way up to the green that was previously in a local option levy is going to go into the coffers of that city or county for an expenditure in that city or county. For school districts, it's just going to the state school fund. So if we move forward with reset at time of sale, which I think is an important proposal that solves many, many issues, we need to find a way to give school districts some local control and the ability to invest in their own local schools. I think these are important conversations that we are having about our property tax system. I hope that we can keep having this conversation and come up with a combination of proposals that does provide greater stability, that addresses the significant challenges faced by cities like Sweet Home, and that allows us to reinvest in our schools. I can't miss the opportunity to point out that today we're spending $1,000 less in inflation-adjusted dollars per student than we were in 1990-91. And we are asking our students in our schools to accomplish a whole lot more. That is a crisis. That is a crisis that we have to address. It's a crisis that exists in every single school district in the state. And if we go to amend the Constitution, we need a solution that helps us reduce class sizes, have longer school years, and that benefits every student in the state and helps us move towards more adequate and stable funding for our public schools. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Representative Gelser? Of course, we'll have a chance to discuss it with her further. You also, I think, had a panel to call, did you?
Yeah, I think you've got the list up there.
I don't think I do.